Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. We have a minute or two before we get started, but I just wanted to say hello and welcome.
I'll add to that. Hey, good morning, everybody. Jim Bush here from the Winkler Group. I see lots of names of people and friends and colleagues listening in today. So good to have you here. Thanks for joining us. Excited to spend some time with you this morning talking about strategic planning, something that is even more critical than ever before, given the current landscape that we all live in. So we're super excited about our time together this morning. Looks like we got a minute or so. If I can, I just want to, since a lot of you are joining early here, we've got lots of people still joining, but Ali and Andrew, Anthony, Barbara, Betty, Billy and Craig, Debbie, Dorothea, good to see you, Elaine,
Hey, Dorothea.
Alonda, yeah, Heather, Ian, and Jody, Kristen,
Hey,
Lori.
Kristen.
Hey, we're all saying hey to people we work with. Luann.
Hi,
Luann,
Luann.
good to see you. Hey, Philip, you're on here. Sabrina, Sarah, Stacy, great to have you. Good to see everybody this morning. It's Tuesday and you guys are coming in to do some learning. I love it.
Great way to start your week.
That's right. That's right. Got through Monday. If we can get through Monday, we can make it the rest of the week. I'm convinced.
Let's see.
Thanks, Dorothea.
Look at that. We have our very own SVP partner and incoming advisory board chair, Ian Devine, with us. Good morning, Ian.
Hi, Ian. How are you? I hope Meredith's doing well.
Oh, I totally forgot about that, Sarah. Small world. Oh, I see Craig Morris from Holy City Children. Good morning, Craig. All right, well, it's officially 10:00 or 10:01, depending on which clock I look at. So either way, it's a great time to get started. So good morning, everyone. I'm Laura Leroy. I'm the Executive Director of SVP Charleston. We are so excited to be here with you today for our current webinar sponsored by Dominion Energy. It's part of our LEAD program, which stands for Learn, Engage, Advance, and Deliver, which you're all doing on a regular basis. And today you'll be able to do so with our great friends at the Winkler Group, Sarah Evans-Sprinkle, Jim Bush, and Jessica Browning. We're missing Tim Winkler today, who's not feeling well, so we wish him all the best for speedy recovery. Today's focus is growth and resetting your strategic plan for growth and resilience. Now more than ever, certainly something we all need. So you're in very capable hands this morning with Jim and Jessica. As always, please feel free to ask questions. You can do so in the question box. We will give you ample opportunity to respond and hope that you'll respond to the survey at the end so we can continue to bring you programs like this with your insight and wisdom guiding us to do so. So without any more hearing from me, I'm going to turn it over to Jim and Jessica, and thank you guys once again for being here.
Well, good morning, Laura. Thank you so much, and thank you all for hosting this with us. We are excited. My name is Jim Bush. I'm with the Winkler Group, as Laura told you. We do two things in the Winkler Group: strategic planning and fundraising. And so, as we're getting started here, it looks like Lara's opened up a poll for us. I think this is a great question as we get started here. Now I want to do some introductions as you guys are doing this. On my side, I have two of my favorite colleagues with me this morning. First is Jessica Browning. Jessica's the other principal on our team. Hey, Jessica, good morning.
Good morning. Thanks so much. Thanks for having us, Laura. This is wonderful.
And then also Sarah Sprinkle. Sarah has a couple of hats for us. One is that she works directly with our clients as it relates to strategic planning. So glad to have you on, and that's really the role you're in today, is to be a resource for us there. So welcome, Sarah.
Good morning. Thank you, Jim.
So Jim, it looks like 71%.
So
you see the
it
poll.
looks like Laura, 81% have. Yeah, 81% have a strategic plan and 19% do not. Well, I think that's great news for everybody that's on here, because we're going to talk about both of those things today, whether you have one today, whether you have a strategic plan or you don't. This is the perfect time to really begin thinking about, or think differently about, your strategic plan. We call this resetting growth, because we see this right now as an opportunity, and given the crazy landscape that we're in, as an opportunity to take a step back, really look at where you are in terms of your strategy and what your vision over the next 1 to 3 to 5 years looks like. So throughout our time this morning, we're going to walk you through what we see as the most important things that you should focus on as you're thinking about your strategic plan. We want this to be interactive. Please don't make this a monologue. The way you do that is to type in your questions through the chat box. If there's a question that we can answer during part of the conversation, we'll do that. If not, we'll hold it and answer it at the end. But I can promise you, we're going to make sure to get your questions answered. So if you want to reach out afterwards with a specific question, feel free to do that as well. But I would challenge you on this. Your question is probably one that others have as well, so don't hesitate to ask it. And we won't put you on the spot necessarily to identify who you are. So what are we talking about today? I think, knowing several of you who were on this call this morning, we've all been in what we call response mode, right? We've been responding, whether you're a frontline organization dealing with the COVID in terms of your mission, or whether you're not, you've been impacted by this. For some of you, that 81% who say, hey, we have a strategic plan, I bet there are parts of that strategic plan today that probably don't make sense over the next few years. If they do, congratulations, you are definitely in the minority. If you don't have a strategic plan, well, I bet that you're on here today because you're really thinking hard about, do we need one? And do we want to spend the time now really focusing on a strategic plan? And we would say unequivocally, absolutely yes. And there are a couple of really good reasons. One is you can't stay in response mode forever, right? There is some urgency about what's going on. We're trying to navigate this new normal. But as we think about the next several years, Jess, I want you to comment on this as we get started. What are we hearing from donors as it relates to an organization having a strategy?
It's a great question, Jim. I think when we think about strategic planning, we think about the organization. How is it going to move the organization forward? But that's really only one part of a strategic plan. Donors really care that you have a strategic plan. They want to see that you are actively moving towards something. They want to know that you're sustainable, and they see that strategic plan as part of that sustainability. So when you're thinking about your plan, think about it from a donor relations point of view, because it really is critical. They want to support an organization that has a plan for the future. And I think that they're going to be fine with you kind of taking a step back, but and reevaluating the plan that you have now. But what's so important is that they see that you are taking time out right now, carving out some time to really focus on that plan for the future.
Yes, I think you bring up one of the most valid points of what we're going to talk about this morning, and that is your donors want you to be sustainable. They want to see you have a plan to grow. Everybody expected that we would hunker down at the start of this. Nobody anticipated, at least no one I know, anticipated that this was going to go on for as long as it has. And I think one thing we've learned, at least for the clients that we're working with, the nonprofits, is that we've figured out, okay, we got to keep going. But life looks a little bit different today. So if you have a strategic plan, don't be afraid to walk away from parts of it. It is perfectly okay to say, hey, not all of this fits us today. We need to take a step back. But I would also say, don't stop there. You got to take that step. It's time now to take a step backwards, pause for a little bit, engage. And we're going to talk very much about how do you engage your stakeholders, who, by the way, our donors are giving today in record numbers. We expect to see record giving. And we also know that from our work, because we're talking to donors every day virtually, we've learned to navigate in this virtual world. We're doing campaign asks. We're doing interviews for pre-campaign planning studies. We're doing strategic planning conversations, all being done virtually. And what we're finding is that our stakeholders are really excited about connecting right now. They've got time, they've got energy, and frankly, they're really excited to be able to talk about something besides COVID. And so they are a captured audience that you ought to take advantage of. So if you don't have your strategic plan today, or even if you do have one, it's time to think about it. Take a step back. I would say this, as we think about the timeline, it doesn't need to take you months and months and months to do this. You can probably accomplish this in a 1 to 3 month time frame. And we'll tell you more about why that's possible as we walk through this together.
And Jim, I think it's so important to reiterate something you said up front. You don't have to be a frontline organization. Every organization needs to reevaluate their strategic plan. Think of an arts organization. What's it going to look like when you cannot have, if you can't have performances in the fall? All of those things need to be part of it.
And that, to your point, Jessica, the idea of what we call best and worst case scenario planning comes into play here, and we're going to walk you through that today. I hope that'll be a takeaway that you'll walk away with out of this, because that is something that I think is really critical as we're looking at what do the next 1 to 3 years look like. None of us have a crystal ball. We all know what we want it to look like. We want to get back to normal, but what is that really going to look like?
Yeah. And when we, Jim, when we start thinking about the strategic planning, I think one of the first things that's so important is, who do you involve in the plan?
Yeah. I'm going to get this out of the way. It's going to sound very self-serving, and I acknowledge that. First is you need to have an outside facilitator. So it sounds self-serving, but it's absolutely true. Here's why. You need somebody that's an objective voice. When we start talking about potential priorities and goals and where we should spend our time and energy as an organization over the next several years, there's a lot of passion that comes into that conversation. And you need an outside objective voice that can help moderate all that passion and bring all of those thoughts together. We also know this very much from our experience, is that your stakeholders, and by stakeholder, we're talking about your donors, your board members, your staff, people who are involved or served by your mission, people that are connected to your organization in some way. That's the general term that we're using as stakeholder today. Stakeholders, when we interview them, are going to tell us things they're not going to tell you. It's a fact. We hear it, and it's proven true every single day. They're not going to tell you that your pet program, something that you love, that you came up with, is not their favorite, or isn't working, or isn't what they think it should be, because they don't want to hurt your feelings. And that's a human emotion that we understand. But I'll tell you what, Sarah, Jessica, shake your heads yes if you agree with this. They are very much willing to tell us that. And
yes.
It's important. We're not saying that just to be funny. That is a really important perspective. When we're in strategic planning, we need to really look at what is working, what's not working. We need to know what people really want. What do our stakeholders, where do they think we should go? I will say, in every single strategic planning project that we've ever done, the conversations that we have up front are the most beneficial to help us identify priorities we hadn't had on our radar yet. And I think that's an important piece of this. I'd also say that it takes more than just simply the staff and the board to accomplish a strategic plan. We feel pretty strongly that you ought to have, we call it a task force. We don't call it a committee. Committees sounds horrible, but a task force, a group that comes together for a very short period of time, whose specific purpose is to help you develop this strategic plan. A lot of times we think, well, isn't that the purpose of the board, or we have a strategic planning committee on the board? We think there ought to be outside influence on that. We think other stakeholders ought to have a voice in this. And one thing we know, because we're fundraisers as well, one thing we know is that when we engage and leverage our board and leverage our stakeholders and their expertise, when we ask for that feedback and we get that buy-in up front, we can get a much bigger financial investment on the back end when we're putting this plan into action, because they got to help, they being the stakeholders, not just the donors, but everybody that's touched by our mission who's involved in this gets to be part of this conversation. Treat them as the investors that they are, and allow for conflict. Conflict is really, as long as it's moderated, again, I think that's why that third party needs to be there, is because you got to have productive conflict.
And I would say bringing in a third-party facilitator is going to save you time and money in the long run. You don't want to get through your strategic plan without involving one of those key constituent groups, because that will come back to bite you once you
Yeah.
implement your strategic plan.
Um, I learned from lessons that we've had. Yeah. All
All
right.
right. So Jim, we certainly had a great sort of calendar for a strategic planning process before COVID. Now everything is different. Does that look different now? How is that
Yeah,
timeline different?
it's a great question. Here's what we're seeing as that's most favorable with donors and our stakeholders today is we still should have a 3-year plan, right? A 3 to 5 year plan, but we better have some 1-year scenarios. So we feel and are really implementing this more than ever before pre-COVID, something we call best and worst case scenario planning. So the idea is take a look now, stop where you are. If you've got that, you're one of those 81% of organizations that has a strategic plan, stop where you are today and look at those strategic goals and honestly assess if they really make sense where you are over the next 3 years. Chances are, at least in our experience, many of those goals still make sense. Now, it's how you get there and the timeline for getting there that could be a little bit different. Now, and in some cases, some of our clients have completely shifted their focus because of COVID. And so their entire strategic plan doesn't make sense. So be honest with yourself. Don't try to put a round hole into a round peg in a square hole. Instead, think about really what really makes sense. Do look beyond the 1-year outlook, though. What we say is have a long-term vision, but a short-term view. Look at this year by year. Be able to pivot, be nimble. Scenario planning works like this. We have a goal. And we look at that goal, like, so for instance, if we want to, I'm just going to make something really simple for illustrative purposes. We want to increase membership significantly by 20% in 5 years. Okay. I don't know if that may or may not be something that is a stretch for us. I don't know, but let's pretend like that is something that would be a stretch. Well, as we look at that over the next 5 years, we may say, well, we're going to try to grow this 5% a year, 5% per year. That may not happen in the first year. So as we think about best and worst case, we need to look at what is that worst case scenario? What if we didn't grow at all in year 1? What would that do to our budget? What would that do to our staffing projections? What would that do to all of those dependencies that we have on not reaching that year 1 objective? So best case planning says, okay, the heck with COVID, it's happening. We're gonna not pretend like COVID's not here, but we're going to have the assumption that we've gotten past COVID and we're back on track the way we should be. That's at the top, right? Worst case is we are completely at a standstill. The world's on lockdown and we are not gonna see any of this happen. And so looking at those different scenarios and then doing things like budgeting for those different scenarios, planning for those, most likely, if we end up somewhere in the middle, probably not going to end up at that whole worst case, right? Because that wouldn't be really a much of a stretch goal. If all of our goals were worst case scenarios, we'd probably be rethinking our goals anyway. So use that worst and best case planning, and probably our experience so far is that you'll end up somewhere in the middle, if not above the middle. And you need to be clear on what your focuses are as well. It's so important right now. Are you still in response mode? Some of you very well may be. Are you in recovery mode? Many organizations that we're working with or seeing today are now in what we call growth mode. Now, not growth in the sense that we might have anticipated before COVID, but I'm talking about from the time that COVID started and the dip that we might have had and our mission and our operations, we're now coming out of that, and we need a plan to come out of that. So looking into the future, think long-term, have a short-term vision, look at it year by year, be willing to pivot, understand that this entire plan is something that you want to write in pencil right now, right? So don't write it in pen, write it in pencil, and be willing to come back and look at it using scenario planning right now and in the future.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Jess.
Yeah, I think especially for the 19% who don't have a strategic plan, you might be thinking, how do we get started? And for those of you who do have a plan, how do you get started rethinking your strategic plan? So I think we always look at 4 questions to ask that help guide us towards that process. Jim, do you want to walk
Yeah, I'll be
through
glad
those?
to. Yeah, we're going to walk through them in detail, but it really boils down to these 4 things. One is assess where you are now, right? If we don't benchmark where we are now, well, it's going to be hard for us to measure where we're going to end up. Secondly is set some goals, the strategic goals. We're going to walk you through the terminology that we recommend that you use for this, because I don't know about you, but I can tell you our clients often get really confused about what's a goal, what's a strategy, what's an objective, what's a task. In
I
fact,
still get confused sometimes.
when we first added strategic planning as a core service for our firm, we had a lot of internal conversation and actually had to put it on the chart on the wall that said, this is a goal, this is a strategy, this is an objective, because they are very distinct. And then knowing where you're going, right? Having the way to measure where you end up to make sure that it's where you intended to go are all important. So we'll walk through those, and I'll just walk you through the first place of where you are now. As you're thinking about strategy and you're thinking about a strategic plan for the next several years, I would recommend that you be data driven. Emotion can play into this. It's where we think we are. But if we're going to measure true success, we need to look at data. What does the data tell us today? So if one of your plans is to increase your fundraising, grow your fundraising plan, fundraising is typically part of a strategic plan somewhere. You got to fund stuff. We would say, look at the data. When you say grow, what does grow mean? Where are you today? How many new donors do you have? How many major donors do you have? How much money do you bring in today? How many new gifts do you get this year, right? What's your donor retention rate? All of these things to think about. Think about being data driven, because the data doesn't lie, right? We all have our own perspectives about, we can all look at something and come from a different place and all have valid perspective, but it doesn't mean that we all have the same data. And so that's why it matters so much. Well, secondly, we really recommend this really old school tool called a SWOT analysis. You've probably done one. Maybe some of you maybe have done one recently, some maybe a long time ago. A SWOT analysis is simply looking at your mission and looking at every parts of your organization and looking internally first to say, what are our strengths? What do we do really well? And looking then, what are our weaknesses? What are those things that we don't do well that we could shore up? And then looking sometimes more external on the opportunity side, where do we see opportunities? And I'll pause here and say that this opportunities area, this is the area that has had the most for us growth in strategic planning as we're working with clients today. Because this COVID, while it's given us a lot of challenges, has also given opportunities that weren't there before. And so they may not seem like opportunities today, and they may be things that we have to go and really pursue for them to be truly an opportunity. But I bet you might be surprised if you haven't done this exercise recently to see what opportunity is out there. Don't sell yourself short there.
Yeah, I think that is such a good point. We are all rethinking our core commitment to our mission and different ways to achieve that mission. So, Jim, I think you're spot on there.
Yeah. And then lastly, look at threats. What are those threats? Those things that are really often out of our control, but things that we really need to think about. And I will tell you this, the threats, this is where we really look at the scenario planning, because the threats can have a dramatic impact on our ability to accomplish these strategic goals. We say it starts with staff leadership. Most of you, I assume many of you are staff. Hopefully we have some board members on here as well. But as staff, you have your finger on the pulse every single day. So we start with you, because you know where we are. And then we bring on the perspective of our other stakeholders, our board, right? We work out in concentric circles. Our staff, our board, our donors, our non-donors, and other stakeholders for that as well. If you've got strategic goals right now that you're implementing, what's the status of them? And sometimes most of the time, an organization that already has a strategic plan, oftentimes there are goals that just aren't relevant and maybe aren't being pursued, or there's some that you just haven't worked on as much as you need to. Well, we don't assume that we need to keep those strategic goals, because again, your landscape could have changed. But it's important to look at those strategic goals and make sure that we assess whether or not we're going to keep working on those and include them in the next strategic plan. And what we say is now is the best time. Then in this first stage, the assessment phase, is the best time to get all of the potential priorities on the table. What we mean by that is ask all of your stakeholders, what do you think? This is one question is going to be the most helpful for you. And hopefully if there's something you get out of this time today, it's this one question. What is the most important priority we need to focus on over the next 1 to 3 years? Ask your stakeholder that. And because that's the question, that perspective, you're going to get a lot, and hopefully you'll see a lot of crossover. So if you do, that's great. That means that you've got some good perspective. You've got folks on the same page. If that question and those priorities are all over the place, it's also a good thing, because that means there are a lot of thoughts out there, and it's time to get those thoughts together. So get it all on the table now, and find out what all the potential priorities are so that everyone's voice is heard from the very beginning.
When we start to think about goals, I think this is where we get a little bit confused again by the semantics. What's a goal? What's a strategy? What's a tactic? I think what's important, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, but is really just thinking about those in order of how we accomplish, how we start big and get smaller.
Yeah. So I do it this way. This is the way it seems to work. And I'm a very visual learner, so you see my hands moving all the time. A goal is the outcome. So at the end of 3 years or 1 year, however long your strategic plan is going to be, and it's okay if it's a 1-year plan, it's okay if it's a 3-year plan. I would really question whether you should have a 5-year plan right now. But what is the outcome? What are you going to accomplish at the highest level at the end of that time frame? We think, because it's so important to know really what we're accomplishing, we love the idea and always promote the idea of using SMART goals. That's an acronym. You guys have all heard of it, I'm sure. Specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time bound. Okay? So when we all look at the end of that 3-year period and we say, what is the outcome that we intended? What is the strategic outcome? We should all be looking at it from the same lens, right? We know it's specific. We know how we're measuring it. We know that, first of all, it is attainable. We know what success is going to look like. Lean on your assessment results from this. You should gather information about your priorities. The next thing you do is you want to put all of those priorities into buckets, categorize them. So financial development, it might be mission growth, it could be programming. There could be a bunch of different buckets. Put them in buckets and then get more feedback on what are the most important buckets that you have, right? So those were the most important priority areas is really what we're asking for here. As we start to look at those, in our experience, the process that we walk through, it bubbles up. We start to see really emerging out of that some outcomes that are going to be the most important for us to achieve over the next 3 years. So if you want another word for goal, think of it as outcome, and that is your top level. This planning starts first with the staff, and then with the board and the task force, and supplemented by the feedback that we get with our stakeholders.
And then as we get to strategies, as we work down, who do we involve in that process?
It's another great question. Strategies, you guys. Think of these are going to be all the different approaches that we could use to achieve those outcomes. Now, there are going to be way more strategies than you're really going to be able to put into action over this 3 years. So it's, again, important to use this funnel that we have here. We've got a funnel. We now know what our outcomes, we know what the goals are. How can we achieve these goals? And oftentimes when we ask board members, how would you achieve this goal? What would your strategies or approaches be to achieving this goal? We get as many answers as we have the number of board members. And that's really good. Because, again, thinking about our board members and our task force and our stakeholders, they bring expertise that is valuable to us and perspective that's valuable to us. We think it's important to get all of these various approaches on the table. Listen to everybody's strategies. We find that even in the wackiest strategies. And let me tell you, people are going to give you some wacky approaches to achieving something. Even out of the wacky ones, there's usually some little nugget that we can absolutely use and include as part of a strategy. So get it all on the table, brainstorm, categorize, discuss, and then prioritize. So goals and strategies. If you're a board member today, or listen to this very carefully, board members, the board needs to stay focused on goals and strategies. Board members, stay out of the next two levels. You need to stay up here. We need you up here, because if you're down in the daily work and you're focused on that, you're not going to see the big picture. We need you seeing the big picture. You keep surveying the landscape. Make sure that the outcomes that we have are the most critical, right? Those are the things that we need to do to move the biggest rocks that we can move, and make sure we have the best approaches. Now, staff, as you're working with your boards on this, approaches change, right? The approach we had for raising money on March 12th is different in some cases than the exact approach that we used during the worst part of what we saw in the pandemic. We raised money in a different way. Our approach was different. The outcome we were going for was the same. We still needed to reach that annual fund goal, right? As an example. Same thing here. Our approaches can change, and this is where that scenario planning comes into play. It's also a great time to think about, what do we need to stop doing and what must we start doing? And those are probably the two hardest questions that you're going to be asked during this portion of the strategic planning, because oftentimes this is where we come to find out where we've always done something this way, or we've never done something that way. This is where that will come into play. And oftentimes, board members, this is where we see for you the biggest challenge, is that it's tough here in this case to change the way that we're approaching things, because again, change can be hard. But we need to keep our boards at the goal and strategy level, really focusing on getting all of the approaches on the table so that we know all the things we could possibly do. Don't discount the wacky ones, because out of the wacky sometimes comes something very useful, and make sure that we answer those really tough questions of in order to achieve these big outcomes now, what do we have to stop doing? What must we start doing?
Jim, before we move on, do you have any tips or hints on how to keep the board at that goal and strategy level as a staff member? How can you keep them focused up high?
Yeah, that is first.
It's a challenge.
It's a challenge. I think we need to acknowledge that it can be a real challenge, and that some board members love the details, right? So I think part of that is simply engaging them and keeping them updated on where we are towards the success of our goals, and keeping them focused on looking at strategies. With every board meeting, take a strategic goal and talk about strategies. Ask if there are other strategies. Get them involved in the conversation at that level. I think where we see boards really wanting to get into the objectives and the specific tasks is also when they feel like they don't know what's going on. So you've got to keep them updated on what's happening. And one of the ways that we did it when we talked about setting those goals is developing the metrics. We'll talk a little bit more about the metrics at the end, but the metrics are important. So if we can tell them where we are towards achieving that goal, and that can help satisfy them, that sometimes will keep them out of the details. I think the other part about that too is you have to resist the temptation to get them involved in the details. If you share too much detail with your board, you're inviting them to be part of that. And there's a fine balance there. And this is not the discussion for us to talk about board dynamics. But what I would say to you is that you as staff have to moderate the kind of information that you give to the board so you keep them at that level.
That's a great point.
Okay.
So let's then get into the specifics. We know that staff primarily drives this part, but how do they get to the measurable objectives phase?
Yep. Here's the thing that we see happens all the time, Jess, is one, we oftentimes like to skip the first two phases. We like to skip really building out the goals, the outcomes, and the strategies, the approaches, and we love to jump here at the objectives of the specific things that we need to do on a daily, weekly, monthly, annual basis to make sure these goals are achieved. So first, I would say lesson number one, resist that temptation, okay? Don't let your board, don't let your task force get here. Objectives and tasks, these are staff functions, period. I would also make this argument to you, if you've done work on a strategic plan and you have really had challenges at keeping your board out, and you've been doing this in-house and you can't get your board out of the objectives, great reason why you might want to think about bringing in someone from the outside. Our job, and we do this every day, and we have to do this over and over and over, our job is to keep board members at the goal and strategy level and keep staff focused on these objectives and tasks. So objectives are those annual accomplishments, the annual things that need to happen that will, and these are what we call small outcomes that need to happen for us to achieve these strategies, right? It's taking the strategies and turning them into actionable items over weekly, daily, weekly, monthly, and annual to then achieve those annual measurable strategies that then reach up and help achieve the goals. So again, knowing what your outcomes are and knowing how you're going to measure success are going to be really important when you're building these objectives. So for instance, if we all have a different opinion about what means growing the annual fund looks like, right? If we say, if I think I've grown it by 1%, that's growing it, but yet you as a board think, well, 20% seems more like growth to me. If we don't know up front what success looks like, these objectives are going to be really hard for us to achieve. But these are the daily, weekly, specifically, and monthly activities that we need to achieve. Again, focused on staff. You build them out. What we think the best way that we have found in our practice is to take the goal and the strategies and determine when that goal needs to be achieved, okay? So now you have your completion date. You need to start working backwards from that date. So backward calendar plan. So if you're going to do something next year and there are things that have to happen in front of that, back out on your calendar, start from the back and work your stuff all the way to the beginning. Oftentimes, if we start from the beginning of our calendar and try to work towards the end, we run out of time. And so that's the best way as you're building out what those activities are. Start with the end in mind. Know when you have to have what the measurable outcome is, when it has to be achieved, what it looks like, and work backwards from there. And I'll just jump right into the tasks. So the tasks are the specific things that happen that are assigned to somebody, that has somebody accountable to them, and that feed back up to those objectives. So, one objective, plan a successful homecoming. I'm making it very general here, but we need to have very successful homecomings these next couple of years. There's a lot of tasks that go into making that homecoming successful, right? So those tasks are the specific delegated responsibilities in every single thing that has to happen to meet that objective, strategy, and goal.
Yeah. And again, when we started to talk about the donor's role in strategic planning and not to overlook that, I think that this one slide really hammers that point home. Donors want to see strategic planning. And so I think as we as nonprofit professionals are bombarded right now, we have programming changes, we might have events that are being canceled, we're starting to focus on end of the year giving. It is so important that we step back and carve out time for strategic planning, regardless of the emergencies coming at us.
Yeah. What makes donors stretch? These are not our thoughts. I think it's interesting to say that. We ask donors. We do this every day, and this comes out often of our campaign planning study, personal interviews that we have. We ask the question, what would make you stretch? And donors tell us this. These are things that they say every single time, the vision and the focus, the sustainability and stability. But look at those last four. Those last four really are the most important. It's growth and resiliency and resolve and results, right? And all of that starts with a strategic plan. So when we think about, do we really need a strategic plan? Do we bother taking the time to do it? We would say to you, if you want to raise more money, then yes, you absolutely do, because that's what donors want to see, and this is the best way to do it. And if you can have a bigger impact, then we know from our experience that donors are going to have a bigger impact in their giving because of that vision that you share with them. And there's an old adage in fundraising. I heard this right at the beginning of my career a long time ago, and it says, if you ask for money, you're going to get advice. But when you ask for advice, you're going to get money. And that has been true for me my entire career, is when we take the time to really get buy-in, get the perspective, make our stakeholders feel like investors, make them feel like they're really part of the plan. That is, to me, that's when we really start to see the impact of in many ways, including the giving part of that. The good question that came up is, how do you recommend monitoring the strategic plan and communicating the plan, the outcomes of the plan themselves? Great question. There's actually a lot to unpack there. First, I think monitoring the strategic plan needs to happen at every single board meeting. There needs to be discussion about your strategic plan all the time. And the reason is because you don't want that plan, first of all, to be something that sits on a shelf. You want to remind everybody of just how hard you worked on that, you meaning them, not just you, but how hard and the effort that went in, and the importance of that vision for the next 1 to 3 to 5 years. It's way too important not to think about it and not to talk about it at every board meeting. And I would also say internally as staff, it's the same. It needs to be part of every leadership meeting, because you ought to be thinking about your strategic plan just the way you think about all of your operational things every single day. You should be thinking about your strategic plan that way as well. Now, how you communicate the outcomes of it, one is, first you have those goals. And as part of those goals, remember that one of the most important parts there is to have those measures of success. What do you call success? So we're always tracking back towards what that end result needs to be, the outcome. So it's always reporting on the outcomes, and it's where we are towards that. I've seen all kinds of reporting tools, like, charts that show progress towards the goal and percentage of things achieved. It's not charts and graphs, you guys. It is stories about outcomes. Bring that strategic plan to life for your board, for your staff, for your donors. Let them see the progress that you've made and the impact that they have had on that strategic plan through their giving and their involvement. And that's going to keep your strategic plan. That's going to give people the energy to keep this going and to want to continue to stay focused on that plan. We're going to give you guys a chance to ask a lot of questions as we wrap up. I do want to ask Sarah and Jess. Sarah, I'm sorry I haven't asked you any questions as we go through this, but I want to ask you one now. You're involved, both of you are involved in our strategic planning projects every single day. So you get to see them from the inside, working with a variety of different kinds of organizations. From our conversation today, or even just with the work we do with clients, what's the one most important takeaway that you think our listeners today should get out of what we've discussed? Sarah, I'm going to start with you.
Oh, I think if there's anything that you can do ever for an organization, but in particular now more than ever, is a strategic plan. Not just for donors, as you mentioned earlier, Jim, but for everyone involved in your organization, your board, your volunteers, your advocates, people in the future who may be advocates. It is the one thing that you can showcase that shows the vision now and in a year and 3 years. And that's what people get really excited about. So they're willing to invest. Whether they start with just their time, they're going to continue to grow in that investment. And eventually what you want is that financial investment, because every strategic plan includes that financial piece, whether, of course, through fundraising, but also through whether it's patients or members or patrons or whatever it looks like for your organization. This is the thing that keeps you sustainable. And that's why donors and people in your community invest in it, because they can see that vision together.
Yeah, I love it. Hey, Jess, what about you?
For me, I think we've all seen strategic plans or been part of them that are too complicated. And so we've seen the beautiful plan, nicely designed, it has 12 different goals and then all the different steps. I guarantee that strategic plan is going to sit on a shelf because no one knows what to do with it. We advocate a plan that is fewer goals. As long as you can achieve them, I think that that's so much more important than a beautifully designed plan. So I would say, I would back up what Sarah said, get started, just take some action on a strategic plan, and then do some really hard thinking and make those goals that are achievable.
Yeah. I think your point of keeping it simple, these don't need to be so big, so comprehensive. You can keep it really simple. And I think that is something that is a great lesson as well. We've got some questions. So yeah.
I was just going to say, echoing what Jessica and Sarah said, oftentimes when we're working with nonprofits, one of the things that I say is that sort of the essence of strategy is simply knowing what not to do.
I love it.
If you
love that.
and on what not to do, it helps clarify what to do.
I love it. That's
beautiful.
that's this. It's
We
what
need
must
to
we
steal
stop doing.
Absolutely.
That's right.
Let's take it.
Yeah. All right, so we've got some. I think we've got some questions. Laura, did you? I couldn't see them, but I saw that some things were coming in.
Yep. So here's a question. COVID has put enormous pressure on nonprofit fundraising and client service. Should the strategic planning process explicitly consider merging with a peer organization in order to serve clients better or even survive? Should the ED or board drive that discussion? So pretty specific, but really relevant and important question about strategic planning and COVID and collaboration.
Yeah, I'm gonna take off my Winkler Group hat. I'm gonna put on my Jim Bush hat here for just a minute to start to answer this. I honestly, this is my personal belief as a donor to organizations. I think one tough but positive outcome that this pandemic is going to have is that it is going to consolidate the number of nonprofits that are doing the same kind of work. Everybody, I come from an animal welfare background, and everybody wants to have their own rescue. It doesn't mean everyone should have their own rescue. And so I do absolutely think that you should consider merging, and if not merging, partnering with other organizations. I'll tell you this, today, donors want to see the biggest impact of their every single dollar that they invest. And if you can show a collaboration, a partnership with another organization, that greatly increases the impact of what your mission is and helps more of the cause that you're trying to achieve, that's going to inspire donors. Donors love that creative thinking. And they're going to be, that's also something that, as you think about all the different ways to get gifts, if you are going to get a corporate gift, they're going to want to see the biggest impact. Like any kind of giving today, they want to see that. Laura, I throw that back to you. How do you look at those organizations that partner, collaborate, merge?
Well, certainly SVP really truly values collaboration and tend to invest time and resources into organizations that are collaborative. So from a group of donors who are committed to building capacity of nonprofits, one of the key elements that we recognize in those leaders is their ability to collaborate.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, you're a funder, so you're telling us collaborate. I would say this too.
Yeah.
You gotta be careful as an organization and thinking about merging or that kind of partnership, particularly if there's some sort of formal merging going on. You've got to do your due diligence there, because you can be taking on an awful lot of debt or encumbering things that you should not necessarily be. So if you're going to do that, you got to go in eyes wide open. And frankly, I don't think that's either a board or a staff function. That is a function that both have to be very involved in to make that possible. Yeah.
And to validate what
also,
both. Oh, go ahead, Laura.
I was just going to say, engaging the community that you serve also, right? And the community of the other organization. I mean, bringing those people to the table is really, I think, critical in this exact scenario some folks might be planning for.
Yeah.
And
It'd be
to
interesting.
validate what you guys are saying, both Jim and Laura, we're seeing this in twofold in our field. First, in the profession, the inquiries that we're receiving for capital campaigns, we're actually seeing collaborations for campaigns and major gift initiatives. But what really truly validates this even more is when we're interviewing donors, they're giving the same amount of money, but they're giving to less organizations. As Jim mentioned, they're larger, more impactful, more thoughtful gifts. So we're seeing it two ways, but it really goes to validate what both of you all were saying.
Yeah, I would say
Excellent
this,
point.
pay attention when this comes up, because where this comes up in the strategic planning process typically is when we're focused on strategies. What are the approaches that we take to achieve an outcome, right? This is where most of the time we see this come up. And I will say this, if you want a point of or a discussion where people really put up their walls, it's when we talk about merging with another organization or partnering with another organization. Oftentimes that's where we have to really navigate and carefully sort of pull the wall back and be able to broker that conversation, because people get very territorial, right? You do it, your organization, you're there because you believe that you do it better than others. And that's great. I hope so. That's fantastic. But
Yes.
that means that it can be also hard for us to look at it with an outside, with that objective perspective sometimes. Yeah. Other questions?
There was another question previously about, is there an ideal number of scenarios roughly that one should plan for in strategic planning?
It's a good question.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think a minimum of 3. One is, what is best case? What if nothing affected us and we saw the kind of growth that maybe we were anticipating pre-COVID? Okay. So second is, what if we stayed flat? What if we saw no growth at all? What would that look like? And that could be in giving and cost. That flat is, you look at it from a lot of angles. And then the worst case is typically, what if it gets worse? What does worse look like for us? How bad could it get? Right? So, and that's often, that's not the fun thing to look at, because oftentimes when we're doing that worst case scenario, we're looking at cutting staff and we're looking at things that are really hard conversations and that we need to be respectful about, because they're people's lives and we get all of that. But at the end of the day, if we don't have that plan and it does get worse, or if we haven't planned for it to get better and we can't catch up because we weren't prepped for that, then then we're missing opportunity, right? Again, we're not able to have as much impact. And I would say it this way: it's not about how much you can raise. It's not about anything else. It's about how many lives, heartbeats, animals, people, whatever your mission is, how much of your mission could you have achieved more if you were ready for it? And that's really what this is all about. So I think the answer to the question is a minimum of 3. Depending on what kind of organization you are, you may have more scenarios than that, but we generally plan for growth, staying flat, and loss.
There also is a question, Jim, about, can you turn a threat into an opportunity?
I love that question. Can you turn a threat into an opportunity? Absolutely. I will say this. Sometimes threats are things that we don't have as much control over. I'm working on a strategic plan right now where this is for an organization that has the opportunity with the city county want to give them a bunch of land, but there's also a threat that someone else is going to get that land. If they get the land, that's a huge opportunity. If they don't get the land, that's a huge threat, because the other organization is going to step right into their market. And so, yeah, the long story short there is that threats can absolutely be opportunities, but let's not put on our Pollyanna glasses and not look at it as the true threat that it is. Let's make sure that we're considering all angles of that.
Well, that goes to my other favorite cliche, that a vision without a strategy is just an illusion.
I love that. We should put that in our slide deck. I think that is awesome. It is absolutely, and that's a great way, I think, for us, Laura, to end. If you've got more questions, what we have found after these webinars is that you often think of a question or you want to have more discussion, go to the Winkler Group website. If you go to winklergroup.com/reset and grow, you can sign up for a free strategy session. What that means is that you can hop on the call with Jess, Sarah, me, other members of our team, and just talk through what's going on. We don't charge you for it. It's not our attempt to get you to sign a contract for something. It's truly just a chance for you to follow up and get more information or talk through things that you've got going on. So we put that out there. It's one way that we've been able to give back to the sector during this time, and we're happy to do that. Just go to our website, sign up for one, and we'll sit down and talk through what's going on. It's been very therapeutic for us, and I think for the folks on your end of the call as well. And with that, Laura, I want to thank you and the SVP again. Thank you all for inviting us today to be part of this. We really appreciate this partnership with you.
Well, we're so thrilled that you've been here, not just today, but you started our program with the fundraising lessons learned from 2008 versus now. So certainly the Winkler Group has been a great partner, and we cannot thank you enough. Please wish Tim speedy recovery from all of us. And really, truly, it's been with everyone on this call today. So thank you so much for joining us. And I hope that you, as you consider how you're planning and sort of bringing the future into the present, you'll take advantage of the resources that both SVP Charleston, CCF, and the Winkler Group have offered, because we're all here to help and support you. And obviously we're collaborating together. So we will people to follow our lead, right, and do the same.
Right.
And we could not do any, follow our own advice. And certainly I would be remiss not to once again thank Dominion Energy for their incredibly generous sponsorship of the LEAD program and allowing us to bring programs like this to you guys. So thank you, Dominion. And lastly, for those of you who would like to see a video of this recording, it will be available after. So you'll be able to see that. And we hope that you'll please take a moment to fill out the survey. So once again, we can take your feedback and turn it into meaningful content and deliver the programs that you wish to see. So thank you, everybody. Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Jim. Thank you, Jessica. You guys all have a great day. Take care.
Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thanks, you guys.